My name is Daniel Wilson, and at 43 years old, I never expected to find myself in a situation straight out of a bad comedy movie. 3 years after our painful divorce, Andrea had remarried a guy named Bradley, who seemed perfect on paper. But at 2:00 inches the morning, on a Tuesday, my doorbell rang repeatedly. When I opened the door, there stood Bradley, disheveled and desperate. "You need to take her back," he demanded, thrusting a suitcase toward me. "I cannot do this anymore. She was your problem first, and I am returning her to sender." Before I continue with this wild story, drop a comment letting me know where you are watching from. Hit that subscribe button and stick around to discover what happened when my ex-wife's new husband tried to return her like a defective product, and how this bizarre situation led to an unexpected journey of healing that none of us saw coming. Andrea and I met during our sophomore year of college at a mutual friend's Halloween party. She was dressed as Wonder Woman, and I was a zombie football player with fake blood dripping down my jersey. We ended up talking for hours on the back porch about everything from our childhood dreams to our favorite breakfast cereals. By the time morning came, I knew she was someone special. Our college romance blossomed into what I believed was a solid marriage. After graduation, we moved to Boston, where I pursued a career in architectural design while Andrea worked in marketing for a cosmetics company. We bought our first home together, a small colonial with a yard that Andrea immediately filled with flower gardens. For the first few years, we were happy, or at least I thought we were. The troubles began subtly. Andrea became increasingly critical of nearly everything I did, from how I loaded the dishwasher to the way I interacted with her friends. What started as gentle teasing evolved into cutting remarks that left me constantly second-guessing myself. When I would attempt to discuss her changing behavior, she would dismiss my concerns or turn the conversation around to focus on my flaws. "You are too sensitive," became her standard response whenever I expressed hurt feelings. Our arguments grew more frequent and intense as the years passed. I suggested marriage counseling repeatedly, but Andrea refused, insisting that our problems were normal and that I was overreacting. Meanwhile, I watched helplessly as the warm, vibrant woman I had fallen in love with transformed into someone who seemed to barely tolerate my presence. The breaking point came during what should have been a celebratory dinner for my promotion at work. Andrea spent the entire meal texting someone and barely acknowledged my achievement. When I expressed my disappointment on the drive home, she exploded. "I cannot pretend to be excited about your boring job anymore. Do you have any idea how suffocating this marriage is? I have wasted 8 years of my life with you." Her words hit like physical blows. That night, she slept in the guest room, and a week later she announced she wanted a divorce. She had already consulted with an attorney and had paperwork prepared. In the fog of shock and grief that followed, I agreed to terms that were not particularly favorable to me. She got the house, though I would continue paying half the mortgage until it sold. She kept most of our shared possessions, claiming they aligned with her aesthetic more than mine. I moved into a small apartment across town, taking only my clothes, personal items, and a few pieces of furniture. The divorce was finalized quickly, and within months, Andrea had put the house on the market. I heard through mutual friends that she was already dating someone new, a successful real estate developer named Bradley Thompson. 6 months after our divorce was finalized, Andrea and Bradley were engaged. From the carefully curated social media posts, I occasionally saw their relationship appeared perfect. Bradley was handsome, wealthy, and seemingly devoted to Andrea. Their engagement photos showed them laughing on a beach in Maui. Their wedding was featured in a local lifestyle magazine, with Andrea quoted as saying she had finally found her true partner in life. I tried my best to move forward. I focused on my career, started therapy to process the end of my marriage, and eventually began dating again, though nothing serious developed. I had just started to feel like my life was regaining some balance when my doorbell rang at 2:00 inches the morning on that fateful Tuesday. Bradley stood on my doorstep, looking nothing like the polished, confident man from those magazine photos. His designer shirt was wrinkled and untucked, his hair disheveled. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and he clutched a large suitcase in his right hand. "You need to take her back," he announced without preamble, thrusting the suitcase toward me. I blinked, certain I was misunderstanding. "What? Take who back?" "Andrea, your ex-wife. My current wife." He ran a hand through his already messy hair. "Look, I know this is unorthodox, but I cannot do this anymore. She was your problem first, and I am returning her to sender." For a moment I wondered if this was some elaborate prank. I looked past him to the curb where a luxury SUV was parked. Through the windshield, I could make out a figure in the passenger seat. Is Andrea in the car?" I asked incredulously. Bradley nodded. "She does not know I am here. She thinks I am checking to see if you are home because she left something important when you were married. But I needed to talk to you man to man first. Bradley, it is the middle of the night, and we have been divorced for 3 years. Whatever is happening between you and Andrea has nothing to do with me." He laughed, a hollow sound devoid of humor. "That is where you are wrong, my friend. Everything that is happening between me and Andrea has everything to do with you because you are all she talks about." Bradley's statement left me momentarily speechless. Andrea had barely tolerated me by the end of our marriage. The idea that I dominated her conversations with her new husband seemed impossible. "You must be confused," I finally managed. "Andrea couldn't wait to be rid of me." "That is what I thought too," Bradley replied, leaning against the doorframe as though settling in for a long conversation. "When we first started dating, she painted you as the villain in her story, controlling, emotionally unavailable, boring. I was the knight rescuing the princess from her tower of mediocrity." A familiar ache spread through my chest at his words. I had spent months in therapy unpacking the gaslighting and emotional manipulation that had characterized the final years of our marriage. "So what changed?" I asked, curiosity overcoming my better judgment. Bradley sighed heavily. "About 6 months into our marriage, your name started coming up differently. Daniel used to make the best Sunday pancakes. Daniel always remembered to get the car serviced. Daniel would have loved this restaurant. At first it was occasional, but it became constant. Every decision, every moment compared to how you would have handled it." He looked toward his car, then lowered his voice. "Last week I found her crying while looking at your old wedding photos. When I asked what was wrong, she said she had made a terrible mistake and that you were the only man who ever truly loved her for who she really is." I felt a complicated swirl of emotions: vindication, confusion, residual hurt, and an unexpected flicker of sympathy for Bradley. I knew firsthand how destabilizing Andrea's emotional patterns could be. "I am sorry you are going through this," I said sincerely, "but bringing her to my doorstep in the middle of the night is not the solution." "I know it sounds crazy," Bradley admitted, "but I am desperate. Our marriage counselor suggested that Andrea needs closure with you. She keeps idealizing your relationship because it ended badly. The therapist thinks if you two have an honest conversation, she might be able to see the past clearly and focus on our marriage." So this was the counselor's idea. Showing up at my apartment at 20 inches the morning, Bradley had the grace to look embarrassed. "No, that part was my improvisation. We had another massive fight tonight when I found her texting you. Texting me, I have not received any texts from Andrea." He pulled out his phone, scrolling briefly before turning the screen toward me. There were dozens of unsent draft messages to my number, ranging from mundane observations to deep emotional confessions. None had actually been sent. "She writes them, but never sends them," he explained. "She says it helps her process her feelings. Tonight I caught her crying over this one." The message on the screen read, "I broke something beautiful because I was too scared to be happy. I think about you every day, D. I'm sorry for who I became with you." I took a step back, suddenly needing physical distance from these revelations. "Bradley, I sympathize with your situation, but this is between you and Andrea. Whatever issues she has with our past showing up here unannounced is inappropriate. Just talk to her," he pleaded. "One conversation. Help her let go of this idealized version of you so we can have a chance at a real marriage." Before I could respond, the passenger door of the SUV opened, and Andrea stepped out. Even from a distance, I recognized her hesitant gait as she approached my building. Bradley noticed too and straightened up. "Please," he said quickly, "I am not asking you to take her back literally. Just help her face reality so we can move forward one way or another." As Andrea drew closer, I saw her clearly for the first time in nearly 3 years. She looked simultaneously familiar and like a stranger, the same delicate features but with new lines of tension around her mouth, her blonde hair now cut in a sleek bob instead of the long waves I had known. She wore an expensive-looking lounge set, clearly having been rushed out of their home with little preparation. When she reached the doorway and saw me standing there, her eyes widened with realization. She looked between Bradley and me, comprehension dawning. "What is going on?" she demanded, her voice tight with embarrassment and anger. Bradley turned to her. "We need to resolve this, Andrea. I cannot compete with a ghost anymore." Her face flushed deep red. "You brought me to Daniel's apartment in the middle of the night to what, humiliate me, force some kind of twisted confrontation. You have been living half in the past since the day we got married," Bradley replied, his voice rising. "Every fight ends with you comparing me to him. Every decision measured against what he would have done. I am tired of sharing my marriage with the memory of a man who apparently walks on water." I felt intensely uncomfortable witnessing their marital dispute on my doorstep, but I also recognized that I was somehow central to a problem I hadn't known existed until minutes ago. "Maybe we should all take a breath," I suggested carefully. "It is late. Emotions are running high." This is exactly the time," Bradley interrupted. "Because if we do not address this now, nothing will change. Andrea needs to decide if she wants to be married to me or to her idealized memories of you." Andrea looked on the verge of tears, her composure cracking. "This is not fair. You had no right to bring me here. And you have no right to keep me in a marriage where I will always be second best," Bradley countered. A tense silence fell between them. I stood awkwardly in my doorway, unwilling participant in their marital crisis. Finally, Andrea turned to me. "I am so sorry, Daniel. This is completely inappropriate. We will go." But Bradley stood his ground. "No. We need to talk this through. All three of us." He looked at me imploringly. "Please." Against my better judgment, I stepped aside. "You can come in, but just for a little while, and only to talk calmly." As they entered my apartment, I had the surreal thought that this situation, my ex-wife and her new husband, seeking relationship counseling from me in the middle of the night, would make an excellent scene in a dark comedy. Except I was living it, and nothing about it felt funny. The three of us sat in my modest living room, the air thick with tension. Andrea perched stiffly on the edge of my sofa, her posture rigid with discomfort. Bradley had claimed my reading chair, leaving me to sit on the wooden desk chair I had dragged in from my home office. The absurdity of the situation was not lost on me, as I offered them water, playing host to the most awkward reunion imaginable. So I began after an excruciating silence. "Bradley says you have been thinking about our marriage." Andrea shot her husband a venomous look before responding. "I do not think it is appropriate to discuss this." "That is exactly the problem," Bradley interjected. "Nothing about your past is ever appropriate to discuss. You have built a wall around your marriage to Daniel, turned it into some sacred, untouchable territory." "That is not true," she protested, but her voice lacked conviction. I studied her carefully, noticing the subtle changes time had wrought. The confident woman who had declared our marriage suffocating now seemed fragile, uncertain. It struck me that this was not the Andrea who had left me, nor was it the Andrea I had married. This was someone in between, someone I did not know. "Andrea," I said gently, "whatever is happening in your marriage now is between you and Bradley. But if my name is being used as a weapon or a shield, I think I deserve to understand why." She looked down at her hands, twisting her wedding ring, a different, much larger diamond than the one I had given her years ago. "It is complicated." "Try," I encouraged. She took a deep breath. "After we divorced, I was so certain I had made the right choice. Bradley was everything I thought I wanted. Successful, ambitious, exciting. Our life looked perfect on paper and in photos. But beneath that surface," she trailed off. "Beneath that surface, what Bradley pressed. I started to realize that what I thought were problems in our marriage, Daniel, were actually problems within me." Her voice quavered slightly. "The constant criticism, the dissatisfaction, it followed me into my new relationship because I brought it with me." A weight I had carried for years seemed to lift slightly at her words. How many nights had I lain awake, questioning what I had done wrong, how I had failed her? "When did you realize this?" I asked. "It was gradual," she admitted. "But there was a moment about 6 months into our marriage. Bradley and I were having dinner with his colleagues, and he told a story about us that was slightly exaggerated to impress them. Nothing malicious, just typical social enhancement. But I absolutely eviscerated him for it on the drive home." She looked at me meaningfully. "It was exactly what I used to do to you." In that moment, I saw myself clearly for the first time. I realized the common denominator in both troubled relationships was me. Bradley leaned forward. That was when everything shifted. Suddenly, Daniel was no longer the villain, but the saint who had tolerated her behavior for years. Every mistake I made was magnified because apparently you would have handled it perfectly. I could not help but laugh softly. I was far from perfect, Andrea. I made plenty of mistakes. But you loved me patiently, she said quietly. You tried to make it work when I had already given up. I threw away something valuable because I convinced myself the problem was our compatibility, not my own unhappiness with myself. The room fell silent as the weight of her admission settled over us. I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Vindication certainly, but also sadness for the years, wasted for the pain we had all experienced. Bradley broke the silence. So where does this leave us? Are you saying you want to go back to Daniel? That our marriage was a mistake? Andrea looked genuinely conflicted. I do not know what I want anymore. I just know that I cannot keep pretending I made the right choice when I left, and I cannot keep punishing you for not being him. It was a brutally honest statement, and I could see the pain it caused Bradley. Despite the awkwardness of the situation, I found myself sympathizing with him. He had entered this relationship under false pretenses, believing he was rescuing Andrea from an unhappy marriage, only to discover he was competing with an idealized version of the very man she had rejected. For what it is worth, I said, addressing both of them, I think the issue here is not about me or even about Bradley. It is about facing the reality that relationships do not solve our internal struggles. No marriage, to me, to Bradley, to anyone, will fix what you need to address within yourself, Andrea. She looked up at me, tears welling in her eyes. When did you get so wise? Therapy, I answered simply. Lots and lots of therapy. For the first time that night, a genuine smile crossed her face. It was small and tinged with sadness, but real. What do we do now? Bradley asked the fight, seeming to have drained out of him. I looked between them, these two people connected to me through circumstance and shared pain. That is not for me to say. But I think you both deserve honesty and the chance to decide what you want with clear eyes. Andrea nodded slowly. You are right. She turned to Bradley. I am sorry for how I have treated you. You deserved better than being married to someone who was living in the past. And I am sorry for bringing you here like this, he responded. It was wrong and desperate. As they exchanged these tentative apologies, I realized that my role in this strange midnight intervention was coming to an end. Whatever happened between Andrea and Bradley going forward would be their journey, not mine. It is late, I said, standing up. You both have a lot to think about, and I have work in the morning. They rose as well, the awkward energy returning as our unusual conversation concluded. As they moved toward the door, Andrea paused beside me. Thank you, she said softly, for listening, for not turning us away, for being kind when you had every reason not to be. I nodded, unsure what else to say. As they stepped out into the hallway, Bradley turned back. I am sorry for saying I wanted to return her to sender, he said, looking embarrassed. It was a terrible thing to say. In my defense, I had not slept in 2 days. Despite everything, I found myself chuckling. Apology accepted. Good luck to both of you. As I closed the door behind them, I leaned against it, processing the surreal encounter. Whatever happened between Andrea and Bradley from this point forward, I realized I was finally truly free of the burden I had carried since our divorce. The knowledge that our failed marriage had not been entirely my fault, that Andrea had recognized her own role in our downfall. It was a validation I had not known I needed until I received it. The days following that bizarre midnight encounter passed in a haze of reflection. I kept expecting to hear from Andrea or Bradley, but my phone remained silent. Part of me was relieved. I had provided what help I could, and now it was time to step back. Another part remained curious about what would become of them, whether their marriage would survive this crisis. A week later, I received an email from Andrea. The subject line simply read, "Thank you." Inside was a thoughtfully composed message explaining that she and Bradley had decided to separate temporarily while she began therapy. She acknowledged that her idealization of our past relationship had been unfair to both Bradley and herself, preventing her from truly investing in her present. She thanked me for my kindness that night and apologized again for the years of pain she had caused. Her closing paragraph struck me particularly. I want you to know that I am not reaching out with any expectations or hidden agenda. Our chapter ended years ago, and I understand that. But your compassion that night helped me see that I need to face my patterns honestly if I ever hope to have a healthy relationship with Bradley or anyone else. You deserved better than who I was during our marriage, and I am finally doing the work I should have done long ago. I sent a brief, supportive reply wishing her well in her journey of self-discovery. It felt like a proper epilogue to our story, one that had been missing until now. 2 months passed, Spring arrived, bringing new energy to the city and to my life. I had been seeing someone new, a kindergarten teacher named Laura, who approached life with genuine warmth and refreshing directness. We were taking things slowly, both of us having experienced enough relationship disappointments to value careful foundation building over rushing toward commitment. On a sunny Saturday morning, as Laura and I were leaving my apartment for a hike, we nearly collided with Bradley in the hallway. He looked markedly different from the disheveled, desperate man who had appeared at my door that night. Well-rested, composed, casually dressed in jeans and a button-down shirt. "Daniel," he said, seeming as surprised as I was just coming to see you." I introduced Laura, who graciously offered to wait in the lobby to give us privacy. Once she had stepped away, Bradley explained his visit. "I wanted to thank you in person," he said. "That night was a turning point, though probably not in the way I expected." He explained that after their separation, he had also begun therapy and had come to realize that he had been attracted to Andrea, partly because of her unattainability. The constant need to prove himself worthy had felt familiar, a pattern from his childhood relationship with his high-achieving father. "We were both using each other to play out old scripts," he said. "I needed to be the hero who could win the unwinnable heart, and she needed someone to reject, so she could justify her belief that relationships are ultimately disappointing. And now I ask, we are finalizing the divorce," he said, "but without the bitterness I might have expected. It is the right decision for both of us. We are being kind to each other through the process, which is something I would not have thought possible before that night at your apartment." I nodded, appreciating his maturity and self-awareness. "I am glad you both found clarity. Andrea is doing well," he added correctly, reading my unasked question. "The therapy seems to be helping. She asked me to tell you she wishes you happiness if I saw you." There was a brief, comfortable silence between us. Two men connected by an unusual shared experience, no longer adversaries or competitors. "You know," Bradley said thoughtfully, "that night I came here, I was convinced you had some secret to making Andrea happy that I was missing. Now I understand no one holds that key but Andrea herself. That is probably the most valuable realization in any relationship." I agreed. We shook hands before parting, an unexpectedly friendly conclusion to our strange connection. As I joined Laura for our hike, I reflected on the curious path that had led me here. 3 years ago, my divorce from Andrea had felt like failure, a devastating end to what I had believed would be my lifelong partnership. I had questioned everything about myself, internalizing the criticism and rejection, until it became my own voice of self-doubt. The healing process had been slow and painful, requiring me to rebuild not just my life, but my sense of self-worth. Now I could see that ending for what it truly was, not a failure, but a necessary transition. Andrea and I had been wrong for each other in fundamental ways, both bringing unresolved issues into our marriage that ultimately made it unsustainable. Her sudden reappearance in my life, while initially jarring, had provided an unexpected gift, confirmation that I was not solely to blame, that I had not imagined the gaslighting and emotional manipulation that characterized our final years together. More importantly, the encounter had shown me how far I had come. The man who greeted Andrea and Bradley that night was not the wounded, self-doubting person who had moved into this apartment 3 years ago. I had developed strength, perspective, and compassion, even for the woman who had once caused me such pain. As Laura and I reached the summit of our hike, the city spread out below us in miniature. I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought me here. Every relationship, even the painful ones, shapes us. Every ending creates space for new beginnings. Andrea had not been my final chapter, but merely a complex, important part of my story, one that had ultimately led me toward greater wisdom and authenticity. The divorce I had once viewed as my greatest failure now seemed like a necessary step toward becoming the person I was meant to be. Sometimes the most valuable gifts come wrapped in the most painful packages, and sometimes healing arrives in the most unexpected ways, even in the form of an ex-wife's new husband standing at your door in the middle of the night demanding you take her back. Have you ever experienced an unexpected encounter that brought closure to a painful chapter in your life? Or have you struggled with idealizing a past relationship rather than seeing it clearly? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might help someone else find their path toward healing. If this story resonated with you, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up so more people can find it. And remember, sometimes our greatest growth comes after our most painful endings. Thank you for listening, and I hope this story brings comfort to anyone struggling with the aftermath of a difficult relationship. Share this video with someone who might need to hear this message today.